Hello, everyone, and welcome to the World of Podcast, first episode ever, really. I'm here with the boy Risticles from the same server I play on and the same guild. So, Rist, if you shortly introduce yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Aristicles. I main an Resto Shaman in the guild Innuendo.
And yeah, I'm CWoosH, aka Biffig Biff, also playing Innuendo. Top 10 Horde Guild, we kind of chilling, we slacking. We dropped from grace a bit, but that's a story from another time. And for the first episode, we have the guest XN, or how do you want to be called actually? You have XN, Ascalon, or
Yeah,
what?
I think XN is fine. I think that's the name that most people know me from.
Okay, because it's a shortage for Xylondof DJ?
Xylophone DJ, yeah.
Xylophone DJ. Where's that from, actually?
Well, that's a long story actually. Do you want to get into that? I'd love
Yeah,
to get
sure.
into it. Alright, so when me and a couple friends, actually it's not that long, but when me and a couple friends started playing private servers, initially we just wanted to play for fun and never wanted to take it seriously. So we just Googled some stupid names, and that's how I landed on Xylophone DJ. I literally just Googled stupid names for MMOs.
So, not even a name generator or anything, it just showed
Nope.
up?
Yep.
Alright, okay. That's one way to do it. Alright, so actually, just to get into that whole conversation about World of Warcraft, like, when did you actually start World of Warcraft?
I think I started early 2005. I remember back in the day, I used to play Counter Strike with friends. And then one day, one of my friends was like, "Hey, you want to try this new game?" And I'm like, "Sure." And back in the day, when you bought the game, you could give people like 14-day trials or whatever. So I tried it out and got hooked ever since.
Alright, okay. So, basically, kind of same time I started, actually. When did you start, Rest?
um, I think it was like around launch. It must have been like 15. Long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah, the game has definitely evolved and come a long way since then, hasn't it? Um, but regarding private servers, how many like you said you played the launch and the original vanilla. So did you stick to vanilla? Did you try TBC, Wrath of the Lich King? When did you like get tired of retail and start your private server adventures?
Well, I played all of Vanilla, all of TBC, and then all of Wrath. And then I think I quit the week after we cleared Heroic 25-man Lich King. Because at that point, the game was just getting boring. I think ICC lasted for like 8 months or whatever.
Yeah, it
It,
was a
it was
while.
just not fun anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Did you play
at that
Warlock
point, I
back
just
then
quit.
too?
So I started with a priest in vanilla. I stuck with priest until Wrath, and then I played Warlock.
Oh, okay. Bounced around a little bit. Always been a caster, however.
Yeah, I always had a thing for casters. I felt like if I want to play a fantasy game, I want to go the full way and play something with magic and spells and stuff.
I'm the complete opposite. I just wanna go sug sug melee all the way. But yeah, that's cool. All right, so I'm thinking we dive in a little bit more into private servers, your history with it when it comes to all the kinds of aspect about vanilla, I guess, where it comes to PvP, and we'll get into some other topics down the line. But um, like a lot of people, I'm sure, I mean, know you from playing in Apes. You've played a lot of private servers. You have gotten the Scarab Lord title. But something cool that's happened here on Classic is the war games and the PvP that started happening, especially with
Sure.
Blizzard coming in and backing up and doing a tournament. So I guess like the general question I have is about war games in general. Like, how do you feel about them? How do you feel the tournament was handled? How did you feel about all the things alongside the war games?
I think there's a lot of positives and a few negatives to take from this. First of all, obviously, having war games in the game is massive. That was not a thing we were able to have on private servers. We used to have separate private servers for that. So having that kind of retail feature in Classic is great. Trying to evolve a competitive scene, I think that's fantastic. Now, the tournament itself, it was pretty good. There were some issues, especially the rule set, but overall, I think it was fine. And I think we'll definitely get into the rule set.
Yeah, there was some small drama, right? Of like a pet having world buffs or something, and some team trying to get him disqualified. If I remember correctly, Riz, do you remember how it went?
I think they appealed to get a team disqualified because one of the pets had a world buff, which couldn't be removed, and it like stayed for death, something like that. But I don't think it ended up happening.
Yeah. So there was definitely some exploitation trying to be had there and here and there, I guess you could say. But like, what did you like? You said you wanted to get in a bit to the rule set. What do you feel about the rule set? Do you think there was a good way of approaching it, like good first thing? But what would you like to see changed, I guess, for next time?
I think, first of all, I'd like to see the win condition based on kills removed. So, as it stands right now, if the game ends 0-0 after 35 minutes, the team with more kills wins. And that just promotes turtles and weird, like, it's a capture the flag game and you're playing team deathmatch basically, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the issue that most people wanted to get fixed, but obviously I can understand that Blizzard can't completely fix the rule set in the middle of the tournament.
Yeah, and
And
like you saw it a
then,
lot in the US games, right?
yep,
Like really
exactly.
heavy turtling. Why do you think it didn't happen for Europe?
I'm not sure. Maybe we're just more honorable when it comes to that.
That's what I was thinking too. Like, especially apes versus apes, right? In the final, like,
Yeah, you can't have these turtles in these kinds of games.
do you
No,
do you
the
have any solutions in mind? Like, how would you fix this? Because obviously, like, if you get two really competent teams, games can drag on for hours.
I mean, people have brought up a lot of things to fix it. I think for me, the best idea would be something like most damage done to the flag carrier. It's gonna be a little tricky to track, but I'm sure Blizzard can do it.
yeah.
You basically have the flag record the number of damage you get while it's being held, and then in the end you just check that.
That's a good idea, actually. I mean, even on retail, you have the track damage statistic, and in arenas and all of that, you have very specific breakdowns you can get. So that could definitely be a thing, I think.
I think
I
in
think another
retail,
thing. Yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh. Like in retail, they also have a mechanic which causes the flag carrier to take increased damage the longer he's holding the flag, right?
Exactly. That's what I was gonna bring up as well. I
Uh,
think that wouldn't be a bad idea, at least for war games.
yeah, for sure.
Maybe even just throwing the ball out there, right? Some kind of custom settings for war games. Like one thing I think we can probably all agree on is imagine if you could customize it. So let's say you could add the flag carrier takes more damage, but also let's say you get your consumes back, your cooldowns back, all of that stuff after a war game ends. I think that's something a lot of the general population would like. Um, like the appeal of PvP, a lot of people wants the PvP, but there is for sure a certain cost to it in classic compared to like retail, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly what I suggested in the official Blizzard Discord as well. I suggested something along the lines of if you join a war game, you basically snapshot your character. And then once the war game is over, your character returns to normal. Because
Yeah,
there's nothing to gain in war games anyway. You're not getting honor, you're not getting anything. So might as well not make you lose anything as well.
I've had the exact same thought. Like, especially because if you're raiding, you're logged out for with world buffs for like 2 or 3 days, sometimes even longer, and you can't really play your character in that time. So, like, this way you'd be able to do war games as well.
Yeah, I think that would be a very nice solution where I know for a fact, like in our guild, a lot of people want to PvP, but we're also, you know, trying to PvE and push ladders, especially now during DMF week. And there's a lot of cost to it, and a lot of people I think are, you know, backing out of the PvP just because of the cost aspect to it. I think that would like really, really increase the participation of PvP across the board. That would be an amazing change, I think.
Another thing, like war games enabled was the CDL, and like actually allowing duels cross server with anyone. Like you also participated in the CDL, right? Like how did it go for you? Like and like what I'm really trying to get at is what do you think of the rules?
I think the rules weren't perfect either. I think overall, this game is not about duels, right? It's gonna be impossible to balance duels, and they tried their best, but I feel like in the end they went the wrong way. So in trying to balance the duels, they tried to restrict as many things as possible. You know, restricting some trinkets and some specs and consumables. I would have actually gone the other way around and said just allow more things. And because right now the way it is, the classes with very short cooldowns or no cooldowns at all, like shadow priests and hunters, will almost always come out on top, which they did both in the American and the European CDL. So I
Yeah,
would go ahead and say, why don't we allow more things? Allow Rocket Helm for every class, allow Title for every class, allow this and that,
because
and then see how it goes.
that's what you ended up seeing. I feel like the example with Shadow Priest having no cooldowns, like in a Shadow Priest Rogue duel, where the Rogue could probably win the first duel using his cooldowns good, but then the second duel it was just is GG, and sometimes the Rogue wouldn't even win the first duel, you know.
Absolutely.
But I feel like there's also other examples. So I'm curious what you think about yourself playing a Warlock against a Rogue, and how that rule set kind of worked out for Warlocks in, I guess, Warlocks in general. How you feel about the rules about for Warlocks?
I well, first of all, I definitely get the reasoning behind banning Soling. I think Soling is too strong. However, it also felt a little too restrictive at times. Now, against rogues specifically, it was fine because they didn't let rogues use T against warlocks, which is kind of our killer. So against rogues, I'd say it was fine, but overall, it feels a little too restrictive. Not just for me as a warlock, but in general. Like you couldn't, for example, use a spell stone and a health stone. That would not be allowed,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's a little too much.
I also feel like they're trying to balance the game, which is inherently like first of all they can't properly balance it to begin with, right? And then like second of all, like what you're saying, they're restricting like people's options and choices and kind of dulling the move set basically.
There are certain examples I think that like that makes sense. For example, if people could use everything, I mean, it's kind of how you wanna do your dual tournament, but like if a warrior can use everything versus a mage who can use everything, like there are certain cases I think where it makes sense. Um, but you know, it's you know the discussion we're having now probably tips out, and his boys have sat and deliberated for hours and gotten feedback, and there's always gonna be changes, I think. But do you think dueling in AQ XN with the gear that comes from AQ and stuff like that, do you feel like any class is gonna become stronger in general in PvP from AQ?
Uh, I'd probably give like my first thought would be to give the advantage towards the casters because they start to scale like very very strongly. However, there are some very strong melee weapons in AQ as well. So the melees are definitely gonna have a nice power spike. But in terms of overall strength, I feel like warlocks and mages are definitely gonna have the best power spike.
Yeah, I kind of am leaning towards the same way, but it's gonna be interesting to see. Like, as melee weapons, I'm sure you're thinking of Dark Edge,
Yep,
which can, if the proc happens, could in theory just win you a duel outright, right?
pretty much. Yep.
So it's a little bit of RNG there, but it's gonna be interesting to see. Like from my point of view, like I play a warrior myself, with the conquer gear being a little bit defense heavy, where it changes melee matchups. So melee is gonna have to use more hit towards a warrior. Just gonna be a lot more tanky in general. So there's gonna be a lot of more different itemization if you're gonna fight a AQ warrior compared to a ranking warrior, let's say. Which will be interesting to see how that develops.
But also in general the HP doesn't go up that much, right? But the burst goes way up, so everything will just become more bursty. And like Jules is one example, but like group PvP, people are just gonna get blown up all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's gonna be fun to see though, cause keep in mind, me and Wrist have not played private servers, so AQ coming up and all these new patches, it's all news to us. So it's really good to have you here to be able to pick your bane and see what's gonna be strong, and you're calling caster. That makes me a little bit scared as a warrior, like I'm gonna die even faster than I am.
I probably will. Yeah.
Alright, it is what it is, I guess. Alright, so we touched on AQ a little bit. I guess we could, unless there's anything you guys want to talk in about PvP or war games, I think we can talk a little bit about AQ. What are you guys feeling?
No, I'm good to
Sounds
move
good.
on.
Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, Xen, you've gotten the Scarab Lord on, was it Light's Hope?
Lightbringer. Yep, from Light's Hope.
Lightbringer. Okay. So, very broad question, but how was that experience for you going for Scarab Lord? Um, yeah, the general experience. How did you prepare? How was the grind? Was it as you expected it to be? Was it harder? Yeah.
So I had the pleasure of helping a friend do Scarab Lord in real vanilla. So I always had this little taste of the quest line, but I've always wanted to do it myself, which is why I went for it on private service. And I gotta say, it was the most fun thing to do, like by far. It is such a crazy experience. Even if you don't care about the lore, or you don't really read the quests or whatever, I think just the way it makes you travel around the world and do things around the world, I think it's really fun and interactive.
And especially since you have to, have your boys back you up, right?
For sure, yeah.
You need your entire guild essentially. Now, how do you feel like it's gonna differ from, let's say, Lightbringer to Classic? Let's say Gehenna's your server. What's the biggest difference you think is gonna be?
I think the biggest difference is gonna be the length of the war effort. On Lightbringer, we had a 1 month war effort. On Gehenna's, I don't think it's gonna take that long, which is gonna reduce the amount of Scarab Lords significantly. Because remember, every Scarab Lord is limited to, or every raid is limited to one head of Broodlord. So that means only one guy per raid can get Scarab Lord.
Yeah.
And if the war effort only takes a week, then you're only gonna have a limited amount of heads.
Yeah, it's
And
gonna be.
let alone all the people who are gonna do the farm, right?
Yeah. I think also the main thing, I've kind of noticed, I'm going to try and gun for it on my server. I've done a lot of the research, preparation, everything is pretty much on track. But the one thing I am kind of scared about is, I guess, the the amount of people that are going for it and the population of the servers. So I feel like the hives are gonna be a clusterfuck, to say the least.
Oh,
Uh,
for sure.
How are you guys gonna approach that in Apes? Like, I'm guessing you have your guild, of course, but do you think it's on Gehenna's going to be like a free for all, where, as you're saying, the war effort is probably gonna be finished pretty fast? So, do you think on Gehenna's it's gonna be a race to the finish, or do you think some guilds here and there will try and work together to try and collude, so to speak?
I'm sure there are some guilds who are gonna collude. I don't think we are gonna do it with anyone. We have obviously a pretty solid plan that I can't go too in depth about, but it's all gonna be about speed. Like the war effort is basically the limiting factor, and the farm takes a reasonable amount of time. It's gonna take a couple days for sure. So you want to be done as fast as possible, so you can open the gates
Wait,
immediately and then
a couple of
ruin other
days?
people's. Well, sure. Did you expect the farm to take a day?
No, I thought it was gonna take like a week or something, or maybe
Well,
5 days, 6 days.
I think it depends on how many people. I think when I farmed it, it took me I think 6 days. But most of the time I was running around in like a 10-man group. I think in Apes we're gonna go much bigger and speed it up by a lot.
Okay. So I don't know if you looked into, I'm sure you guys have, on how the testing on the PTR has gone for just this quest line. There's some things I think people don't realize might be kind of a bottleneck. And I'm curious to hear your perspective on your playing private servers on how maybe this has changed to Classic. So one of the examples would be how you deputize someone. And deputizing is when you give someone the ability to farm scarabs in Silithus. And the way it works on Classic is if you are going for Scarab Lord and you tag a mob, you need to tag every single mob to be able to loot Scarab fragments. But the thing is, if you have a deputized person with you, you can't double loot from the same mob. So the guy you're deputizing has to go and kill different mobs. So is this something that was the same on private servers, or?
Yeah, as far as I remember, that was pretty much the same as it was on private servers. So when you reach a critical mass of deputized people, they just go somewhere else and farm.
Okay. Okay, that makes a lot of sense then. Another thing I'd like to hear your if you remember when you need to kill the chimeras down on the Isle of Giants. Um, on the PTR, these chimeras had between a 40-minute to 1.5 hour spawn times, and there's only 20-ish of them on the island. So my concern or my thought is that this might be another bottleneck. Is this something that was a problem on private servers, or was the chimeras whatever, you just moved on with it?
It's an interesting question because I don't remember them having I don't remember them having that long of a respawn timer. It was definitely not short, but that seems a little excessive. So
Yeah,
that's that's something we're gonna have to look into, I guess.
I've read some private servers, like I read on Wowhead on some other forums where some private server had like 20-minute spawn time on the chimeras, but on Classic it's a different beast. Um, So yeah, I mean, we'll see how that develops. I guess it's gonna be interesting for sure.
Yeah, if it's 40 minutes, then for sure this is gonna be a pretty big bottleneck, especially because some people are gonna farm them just for the food, right? They're not necessarily interested in the scareblood question.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Um, another.
So,
Go ahead,
like
Riz.
for a potato like me, I've done no research into Skyblade at all. I don't plan on like trying to get it at all. Like, can you walk me through the quest line, like step by step, what you have to do, basically?
Sure. Well, it's pretty long, so I think the whole chain would maybe be a podcast by itself.
Maybe the short version.
But in short, you basically start out with the head of Broodlord, and then you go into this super long rep farm where you grind all the way from hated to neutral, and then you get 3 separate quest lines where you have to kill a bunch of world bosses or a bunch of raid bosses or have to grant specific things. It's pretty long
You could say
and
it's an
tedious.
epic adventure.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
But yeah, there's definitely another thing I'd like to hear your point of view from a private server player when it comes to Ahn'Qiraj, where a player could put himself at war with Cenarian Circle. Um, do you feel like this could be? Well, was it the case on private servers where you know you could get grief there, where people would just kill the NPC or whatever?
I feel like you're leading me into telling a story which we're kind of infamous for.
No, I have
Wait,
no idea.
all right, well, so on Northdale, which was the private server that came after Lightbringer, we did exactly that.
Oh, okay.
There was a guy on Horde, Lizanta, you probably know him.
Yep.
He was going for Scarab Lord, and we just sat in Moonglade all day, hostile with Cenarian Hold, and would attack his quest guy every time he would try to do the quest. And in the end, we basically denied him Scarab Lord because he was never able to finish the quest.
Oh wow.
So that kind of griefing is definitely possible. I'm sure it'll be sanctioned on Blizzard servers because
It's a part of the
it
game.
is just well on. I would argue it's part of the game.
Yeah.
However, even on private servers, they were a little strict with that.
Okay.
I feel like private servers had like more hands-on management, right, than Blizzard servers.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I mean, Blizzard is. Let's be real. Blizzard is gonna change that when Scarab Lord questline is done and it's in the past. You know.
like 2 months after.
Yeah. But no, I kind of like that's what I like about Classic. You have these weird quirks where this would never happen on retail or any other game for that matter, where the community chooses whatever they want to do. Like in this case, where you can bottleneck people, you can affect the way the entire server behaves to this questline.
Yeah, just like this griefing that just started with the Oni buff, like sapping the Overlord so the Oni buff doesn't go out and it goes on cooldown.
Yeah, have you experienced that yourself, Exen, where Oni buff gets sapped? Is that a thing on Alliance?
I've definitely seen it happen, but we've never fallen victim to it yet. So hopefully I don't jinx myself here. But so far it's been okay.
Yeah, okay. That's
I mean,
good to hear.
it's kind of crazy that one person can just grief like I don't know how many people are trying to get Oni buff, you know?
Yeah, it's been
classic.
quite the journey on our server to get Oni buff sometimes. But yeah, okay. So another thing I would like to ask about Scarab Lord, like what would your, I guess, tip be to someone like me, a boomer who is playing vanilla for the first time? Like, what would your tip be going into the Scarab Lord quest chain? Like, especially on Classic, where it's probably gonna be a race. Like, if you could give one advice.
The one advice I could give is get help in terms of in game. Like there's so much to do that you cannot possibly do solo. So don't expect to be able to do the quest line with 3 or 4 friends. You need your guild. You need your entire guild, and sometimes you need even more.
Yeah. And that's where the politics are coming in, especially on
Exactly,
our
yep.
server, where it's a lot about politics, which is kind of fun from time to time for sure. Yeah. How about you, Rist? Anything about Scarab Lord that intrigues you?
Nothing off the top of my head now.
Okay.
One insane grind was enough for me.
Yeah. All right. So I guess we could move on to AQ itself then. So when whoever is going for it in Apes bangs the gong, the gates are open. How's Apes gonna approach it? Are you guys blasting for world first?
I think. I mean, we'd obviously love to, but I think the world first race is kind of restricted by every server's war effort. Now, you could argue that part of the world first race is being able to finish the war effort of your server, but I don't know. I feel like there's no real world first race, but we're definitely gonna try for server first.
Okay. Yeah, it's that's a good point, I guess. It's all about the war effort, really. Whoever gets in first there and has some kind of experience. But I wish you guys all the luck to get that war
Oh,
first, you
thanks.
know. So another thing about when the gates open and all these guilds are rushing in to kill the Scaram and progress in. Like for someone like me who hasn't played AQ, what kind of advice would you give for someone who's stepping into AQ for the first time?
I think I'd say play the mechanics. Vanilla is obviously not a game where mechanics are particularly difficult or really plenty. Like most bosses have one or two, and you can mostly ignore them. But in AQ, I'd say if you're jumping in there for the first time, do it proper. Don't think you can ignore a mechanic that doesn't seem that difficult, because a lot of the mechanics are extremely unforgiving in AQ compared to Black Lair and MC.
Yeah.
So take it slow and play the mechanics, I'd say.
Yeah, for example, as we've seen in Black Lair, where you ignore fire moss mechanics, you just kill them in the room, stuff like that.
Yep.
So I guess a full bag of consumes and ready to wipe mentality is something I think a lot of guilds are gonna need, because a lot of guilds are not used to wiping, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
I think
And
guilds aren't gonna get into AQ with World Boss, at least not the first day.
that's a good point, actually. You might not see a lot of world buffs in AQ, which is just gonna make it worse, right? If you're not very experienced. Like almost every boss has a mechanic that can instantly wipe the raid.
Yeah, and it's the same for speedrun. Like, the more damage you do, the more world buffs you have, the faster you go, the less you're interacting with mechanics. But when you don't have world buffs, it's a lot slower, and I mean,
Oh,
it
we actually have to
feels
play the
like,
game.
yeah, exactly. You have to actually interact with mechanics.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Like for sure, when it comes to, as on the top of my head, getting World Boss into Black Lair, there's so many neat tricks you can do to get there, right? But when it comes to AQ, I don't really see a way of safely getting there with World Boss.
Sure, people will figure it out eventually.
Yeah, maybe. We'll have to watch and see. Um, what do you think is gonna be the guild wiper, Xen? Which boss is gonna be like, nope, you're not getting past me?
I think there's two big walls in AQ, which is the first and last boss. So Scaram is definitely gonna wipe a lot of people, because it's just a completely different boss compared to anything you've ever fought before. Scaram has like, I mean, in general, Scaram doesn't sound that scary because he has a small HP pool. He splits into three as an Earth Shock and stuff like that. But it can get hectic pretty quick. So if you're not careful, you can wipe there. And I think
What's
every class has a specific job there to make sure you don't wipe there. So if you have a couple of slackers, they might be the cause of a wipe.
if you could pinpoint what you think would be the cause of the wipe, what do we have to watch out for on Scaram?
Well, first of all, when he splits, you gotta be careful with your threat, because he has a ranged Earth Shock that can pretty much two-shot you. So the eager beavers in your raid that are just gonna blast immediately will just probably die. Also, the mind control. If the mages aren't quick on their CC, one warrior might just go around and kill your healers or something. And I mean, that doesn't sound so scary when I talk about it, but when you have so much going on, when you have three ads that need to be tanked and a couple of mind control people, it can get pretty chaotic.
Yeah, I can see that. I read up a little bit, and that mind control is no joke, man. If the warrior reaches someone, it's basically a one shot. It's what, 400% more damage when you're mind controlled, I think.
It's pretty scary.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely don't skip over the mechanics on this boss. So you mentioned Scaram and the last boss. What's the thing with Cthulhu? There's a lot of things about Cthulhu, but what do you think people are gonna struggle with on this one?
There's a lot of things you can struggle with. I think first of all, it's just the pull, right? Now, if we have the same pull on private servers, we're gonna see a lot of people wiping. I've heard rumors that on Classic it might be a little more forgiving with the beam timings. So maybe this is not gonna be a big of a deal, but
So
in general, if you have people that don't know how to react quickly, they might change the whole raid and wipe the guild on pull.
okay, just to explain real quick what the pull is. Basically, the way I've seen it, like you have your tank run in right first, get soak the first beams, 3 beams I think, and the raid splits out. So how
Yep.
was it? Was it that way it worked on private servers?
So on private servers, I think it was 2 beams and then it's a random beam. Now, if the random beam goes on a guy who's not moving out of the raid while you're splitting, then you're just gonna chain it because I think it's like 10 yards or something, and it just keeps chaining and doubles in damage until it can't chain anymore. So if you have like 10 people stacked up, 8 of them are gonna be instantly dead, and that's pretty much a wipe.
Yeah. And no nature protection potion will help you there.
Well, it'll help the first 2 or 3 people, but at some point the damage just spirals out of control, right? Because it doubles every time.
Yeah.
Could you just stagger people in? Like let them
Uh,
one by one?
well, that's something people used to do for the first few weeks until everyone has a mount. And I'm not a fan because it's kind of slow and you lose a lot of time for the first phase, but it is possible, yeah. You can have like a super long conga line and just move one in at a time. That works.
So how
More
that's
of
a
a boom strat then.
sorry, go ahead, Rist.
I'm just saying it's more of a boomer strat.
Yeah,
Be-
for sure.
So that's an interesting question actually. How will the Cthulhu pull happen without the mounts?
You can probably just pop a swiftness potion, or you go in like groups of 2. Maybe you do a conga line style, but you do groups of 2 at from every side. So you move in 4 at a time, and then if one guy gets chained, he's just gonna chain one more guy, which is not that big a deal because it's only like 4,000 damage or something. I mean, there's different ways of doing this, and by the time you are at Cthulhu, let's say you one shot every boss and one shot the trash, you'll probably have like 15 mounts by the time you get there. So you only need to split like half of the raid.
Okay. Is that the way you think? I mean, maybe for in your sake or in Ape's point of view, you guys are probably gonna try and skip as much trash as you can and just try and kill the boss, right?
I think on the first week, you definitely want to skip as much just to get the server first, and
Yeah.
then you want to go back and kill all the trash just for the loot.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so is there about Cthulhu, because that's probably the one fight a lot of people are curious about, unsure about how to approach it. Like one misstep could essentially wipe a lot of people. Um, do you think first kill of Cthulhu, um, people are gonna one face it? Do you think it's gonna be that easy, or do you hope that we're gonna get a hard Cthulhu where maybe pre-nerf or what people are talking about?
Personally, I'd love a pre-nerf Cthulhu. I don't think it's gonna happen, but I would love to have a shot at it because back in the days, stuff wasn't that optimized. We now have 1.12 talents and everything. I think it's definitely possible to kill pre-nerf Cthulhu nowadays. In terms of the one shot or the one phase, if we get there with world buffs, it's definitely possible to one phase him on the first week for sure.
Okay. It would be interesting to see. I definitely think guilds nowadays or players nowadays can kill pre-nerf Cthulhu regarding to world boss and all the optimizations that's been made. Uh, Fingers crossed, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. When it comes to nature res, which a lot of people are you know, the buzzword, oh, you need nature S when you go to AQ. Where specifically you think people will need nature S, or what classes do you think will need it?
I'd say only melee and hunter need NR for Huhuran, because she has the berserk, which she does the 15 player poison aura or poison AoE thing, and that's, I think it amounts to like 3000 DPS or something if you don't have NR. So you definitely want to get at least like 100 unbuffed, because then you also get the hunter aura. So you'll be at a decent amount. And then over time, once you get more gear, you can take off a few pieces here and there and just burst her down.
Okay.
In terms of casters or anything, you don't need any NR as a caster.
Yeah, okay. And this is, I think, a question or a debate that I've seen on Reddit and whatnot, where would you agree to the statement that Horde will have an easier time in AQ compared to Alliance?
I think in terms of, actually, I'm inclined to agree there. Obviously, paladins make your life easier in general, but having the ability to do poison cleansing and tremors, I think is gonna be pretty huge in AQ for sure. Now, paladins are just too OP to just count them out, but I think Horde will have an easier time. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, where finally Horde gets to show off their shiny shaman totems a lot more than in previous instances.
So maybe not better, but more equal.
What's your thought? Like, I know we're jumping topics here, but just a general feel. What's your thought about the whole thing about Alliance and Horde? Who do you think has the edge when it comes to PvE?
I think Horde has definitely the higher damage ceiling, but Alliance has the more stable rate, I'd say. You can do a lot more crazy stuff with Bubble that you can't necessarily do as Horde, and that lets you ignore some of the mechanics sometimes. Whereas as Horde, you kind of have to be careful sometimes, but you also have higher potential to just like just completely go out of control and kill a boss way faster than Alliance.
Yeah, I agree to that. I think it's interesting what you mentioned with bubble and all that, but we'll get into that later when it comes to speedruns. But on the topic of AQ, if you could choose one item in AQ, or maybe if you have more examples, which item do you think will, when it drops and you're in an average guild or whatever, which item do you think would cause the most drama? Because Black and Larry, you have the DFT and everything. What's the DFT of AQ?
I think I would have to go with Dark Edge. I think there's too many people that are attached to that item just because it looks cool and it sounds cool and it has a nice proc and everything. I think the Dark Edge will be the most sought after item in AQ.
Yeah.
Also really rare, right?
Say what?
It's also really rare. Like what
Yeah.
drop rate?
I
Like,
mean, we'll
three?
see. I think, like, if we go according to private server drop chances, it's pretty rare.
Yeah, it would be an interesting weapon to see drop for sure. I think we'll see some hilarious Reddit threads about this weapon. But as you mentioned, there's two walls in AQ with Scaram and Cthulhu. There were some guilds, especially on our server, and I'm sure on Gehenna's as well, where Black Lair killed some guilds. Like the difficulty, you know, it was a little bit higher, with Fire Mob being different compared to private servers, a little bit harder, some people say. Do you think AQ will kill a lot of these, let's say, average guilds in the game? Or do you think they will be fine?
It's always hard for me to gauge how the average guilds do because I live in my own bubble. I'd love to say no, but I'm sure there are some dad gamer guilds that will struggle in AQ and will end up having to either merge or disband or look for other options. I'm sure there are some guilds like that.
And on
But
your
overall, I'd say it should be easier. With the amount of resources we have available to make this raid easier to us, both in terms of the internet and optimization in game, I think it'll be fine.
That's a good point. A lot of people are way better now, and know exactly what's coming in AQ. People are stocking up on materials for AQ for half a year already. Yeah, we'll have to see. But when it comes to like we talked about the walls, right? Scarum and Cthulhu. Is there the trash in Blackmoor Lair? You have the spinner mobs, the 3 draconids, that are kind of annoying to deal with if you're not quick on your feet or over aggro from a mage, whatever you may have. Is there any trash in AQ40 that you feel like, oh, yeah, I can't wait to see guilds wipe to this trash?
I think there's a lot of that. So the twins trash and the Cthulhu trash are extremely unforgiving. And it's gonna be very fun watching people wipe on that. They're tricky for different reasons, because the twins trash is just a big Anubisath guy, but he has randomized abilities. So you might end up with some tricky trash that has the worst of two worlds, and then people are just gonna struggle with that. And then the AQ trash is the complete opposite, where it's just a lot of trash with one ability each, and it just causes too much chaos because there's so many of them.
Yeah, I've heard tales of the trash after Emperor or the Twin Emperors. Um, and as I've seen on some private server runs of AQ, a lot of people seem to be aiming to skip this trash. And do you think that, that's gonna be the meta in AQ on Classic
I
as
think
well?
so, yeah. We're yet to see what Warcraft Logs is gonna do in terms of how many packs you're allowed to skip for a run. But I think overall, if there's no development on that, I think most people will try to skip that pack or the trash in general, not just one pack.
Yeah, that makes sense. The trash there do look very scary. Seems like you can have some sad tanks there losing their bus because of mind control or whatever
Yep.
you may have. So it will be fun to see.
But then
Um,
again, skipping is not that easy either, right? Because it's such a narrow hallway that you have to maneuver around, and it can get quite tricky to skip the trash.
which is
Either way, there's gonna be wipes.
yeah. I mean, skipping is a skill in itself as well. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see if you can do those cool hunter skips of the trash and whatnot. Um, But I think we move on to the speedruns, and that will tie in with how you think logs are gonna be tracked on AQ. But I'll start off with a pretty straightforward question, and we saw Apes is not you guys don't seem to be too focused on speedruns. Lately you've had the War Games tournament, you've had the Duel League. But what's Apes kind of mindset when it comes to speedrunning? Are you guys planning to do anything this DMF, or are you waiting until AQ?
I don't think we have any concrete plans to do any speedruns. We were never too much into speedruns, and I think the only reason why we did one was because we were confident that we could push the times down by a significant amount. We also don't really have any practice when it comes to like PTRing. So all the speedruns we do are just basically first try improvisation. So I think speedrunning isn't really something we're looking forward to do. Also considering that a lot of us, if not the majority, does not like raid logging. So we don't really want to get DMF and then log out for 5 days just to wait for the next raid lockout. That's not something we would do.
Okay. Meanwhile, some of us are raid logged waiting for next
There-
lockout.
There's
Yep.
nothing wrong with it. If you want to do it, there's nothing wrong with it. But I think the majority of our guild just prefers to play the game.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so I'm sure as if everyone is, you know, into the whole Warcraft logs and everyone wants to parse and do as good as they can in the raid. With the discussion, I'm sure you've seen it about the non-world bus category. Would this be something like? What's your opinion on that? Do you want it to be kind of the main track, or do you want it to just be, you know, something on the side, or not the main track at all? What's your opinion on that?
Personally, I'm not a big fan of the no world buffs category. I'm not a fan of world buffs in general, so I would actually love to see world buffs removed from the game, or at least not being able to use them in raids. However, as long as they're part of the game, I think you have to use them.
Yeah, I
For
think.
me, like speedrunning, it's pushing your character to the max, right? You're trying to get all of it, get like as much out of it as you can, and then like deliberately gimping yourself is, I don't know, it seems kind of weird.
I
So
agree.
yeah, like removing world buffs would definitely be a solution to that, because I mean it would just lower like the amount of options, right? But like you'd still be getting the most out of it.
Yeah, and it's also the fact of, for me, in my opinion, it's the fun part of, you know, you do the speed run, the actual speed run one time a month, and you have one shot, you know, to get it right with DMF. That's kind of the fun aspect for me, where everything is on the line during DMF, kind of.
And it, like when you don't practice on PTR and like you do it once a month, it's really hard. Like it's the anticipation of it is kind of unreal, right? Because like you said, you only have one shot of it, and like it's make or break at that point. Whereas if you spend all day in PTR practicing, then it takes away a lot of that thrill.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. But yeah, it's well, it's interesting to see how it goes. But I'm kind of on the same page there, where I think as long as they're in the game, let people use them as much as they want, and you know, push their character to the absolute limits. Um, I kind of asked you about the faction balance before when it came to raid, but when it comes to speedruns, why do you think we see so many more alliance guilds on top compared to horde? Is it the reasons you mentioned earlier, or is there something else because it's speedrun?
I think there's two sides to this story. I think a lot of the crazy private server guilds decided to roll alliance on classic. So we just don't have as many good horde guilds. Now, obviously, we have a lot of good horde guilds, but overall, the most experienced private server guilds pretty much all rolled alliance. And the second side to it is basically what I talked about, that it's much more forgiving to run as alliance because you can do so many things where you can just ignore mechanics as opposed to playing horde.
Yeah. What, especially as we've seen with Paladin bubbles, you know, pulling two techie packs or
Yeah, exactly.
doing the skip before Chromagus, but that involves a flask of petrification as well, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, it seems like a lot of the things Alliance are doing is it just seems a lot more user friendly to execute, let's say. Whereas Horde, you see, for example, Onslaught doing crazy stuffs with an ice block to pull, you know, three techie packs together. But yeah, it's interesting to see the different kind of metas of the factions. Where to me it seems like Alliance are you just get in there, they kill everything smooth and clean. Where it feels like Horde are doing crazy stuff just to, like, you know, abuse the fact they have shamans with chain heal. You have a lot of healing output, so they can, you know, take a lot more damage. Uh, it's very, very interesting for me to watch the different strategies the different factions are using.
I think it's very interesting as well because it's like you say, right? They have fundamentally different approaches to the speedruns, which makes it really cool to see. And I'm glad that we have a horde guild in the world that is really trying to push the boundaries, as opposed to just having a bunch of alliance guilds doing it.
Yeah, they're definitely a big inspiration for us and how we want to, execute our Black Moon Lair and stuff. It's very cool to see. Um, Another thing, when it comes to speedrunning of AQ, um, what kind of comps do you think we'll see in AQ? Like right now, it's a lot about melee stacking, especially warriors, with maybe one or two mages, a warlock. How do you think that's gonna change in AQ?
I think the overall philosophy will stay the same, where melee is king, but I think we're also definitely gonna see a couple more casters, maybe 2 more mages and the warlock more. It's never gonna be a caster heavy raid. Well, you could, but I don't. It's just not gonna be good enough, right? Melee is just too strong. Even if the boss damage might be better, I think for trash you just need to kill it so fast that you definitely need the direct damage of melee classes.
Okay. Yeah, because a lot of people, I think, have been hoping, oh, this is the time for the mages and the warlocks to shine. Maybe not in a speedrun, but maybe in other
Yeah,
guilds, I guess.
I think in a normal raid it is definitely our time to shine.
I was
In
gonna
a
say,
speedrun, not so much.
do you think like removing world buffs would also like cause you to have like a like a more balanced raid composition?
That's
Do
an
you,
interesting question.
because warriors, like the reason they scale so much is because they get more rage from crits, like everything, like all the world buffs and everything they get, like really, it kind of snowballs how much damage they do. Whereas for mages, it's more for casters, it's more static.
That's a good point. I've never really thought about it that way. Uh, I think it could definitely give the casters a little bit of an advantage, but then again, if the fire mages don't have a lot of crit from world buffs, then they're not gonna do as much either, right?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it might definitely balance things out a little bit, but I'm not sure if we'll ever get to the point where a heavy caster raid will outperform a heavy melee raid.
Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to speedrunning in AQ, as you said, you probably will see a lot of melee. Um, we have a very specific spot in Black Moon Lair that makes or breaks the speedrun. And a lot of people would, I think, agree to it. It's Suppression Room. Suppression Room has been very clean last few speedruns we've seen from Onslaught and Progress. A lot of things have been figured out. But would you agree that Suppression Room is the place where a speedrun is made or breaked, I guess?
It's definitely the most impactful factor, yeah. Other than doing something like Ebon Rock and Flame Guard at the same time.
Yeah. Would
But
you
yeah, the suppression definitely.
would you be able to like kinda draw a similarity to a place in AQ that will make or break a speedrun?
I'm inclined to say the Cthulhu trash, just because having a couple deaths there means you're losing world buffs and you have to waste time on reses. However, it doesn't really have the same like I don't know, it feels so different to the suppression because the suppression you lose time when your rogues don't do their job and then you get slowed and everything takes forever. With the AQ trash, the Cthulhu trash specifically, it's more about having random deaths and how they slow you down.
Okay, so the trash there is just mega hard,
Yeah.
as you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So, when so we mentioned with how AQ, we'll see how Warcraft logs is gonna track everything, but how would you like to see Warcraft logs in your ideal way track AQ? Like, would you want it to include the trash skips that were so prominent on private server speedruns, or would you like us to see maybe when you track logs you have to kill bug try of issues, you have to kill specific amount of trash? What's your thoughts on that?
My opinion is that you should do all the bosses in the correct order. That includes the optional bosses. However, you should be allowed to skip as much trash as you want. because there's just so much trash that is like in Blackwing Lair. You have this lab pack in the little cubby to the left when you go into the big room after Broodlord, right?
Mhm.
No one kills that pack.
Never.
And in AQ, most packs feel like that pack. You just don't have to kill it. You can run it past. So I feel like setting an arbitrary restriction to that, it, I don't know. It seems so weird. So for me, I'd say let people skip as much trash as they want, but do the bosses in the correct order.
Yeah, because I feel like it's interesting as well. Especially, I agree to the fact where killing all the bosses, I feel like, is a given. It's a boss. I don't think skipping bosses, even though they're optional, would be the best way to do things. But we will see how it goes. Um, so, what do you, I mean? As you're mentioning about trash skips, and you think that's a big part of doing AQ. Um, how do you feel like I guess the general outlook on AQ? What's your feeling of, like, if you put yourself on the shoes of your average boomer guild that are trying to log and doing speedruns? There are a lot of those guilds. How do you think they would like to run AQ? Like, would you agree to the fact that, um, as you're thinking, with killing all the bosses and skipping trash, or what do you think the general opinion? Have you got a feel for that?
I gotta be honest, I do not know.
Yeah,
I
because
have a feeling they don't wanna. It's tricky because, on the one hand, I feel like people want to skip more trash because it's difficult, but on the other hand, they might not be able to do the skips properly, so they wanna kill them. I don't
yeah,
know.
because a lot of the things, right, was with Warcraft logs, it's public opinion and the voting on how it's gonna be tracked. So it'll be interesting. Like, the general feel I've gotten from reading forums and Reddit and whatnot is that a lot of people are definitely leaning towards, killing bug try or visitors. That's part of the entire speedrun. But where it's very divided, I'd say, is, the trash skipping, where some guilds think, like, it's a skill to kill the trash as well, to do the mechanics of the trash, because the trash is actually hard in AQ. While I agree to the fact what you're mentioning, it's a skill in itself to actually do those skips properly, move as a 40-man unit, and do that stuff correctly. Um, but I mean, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see and how it goes. Either case, we'll be speedrunning that place for a long time coming soon, right? So,
Uh,
um, the last question I would like to ask you. It's very general question, but if you'd have to pick one point in time, which one would be, over your entire World of Warcraft career, like, your favorite memory? Which is the one experience you're like, fuck yeah, I did that, or something along those lines?
oof. That's I'm gonna have to dig deep for that one. That's a good question. I think if I had to go overall, all of WoW, including all the private servers and everything, it must be something that I did as a kid in early vanilla. Uh, Probably something like getting my first benediction on my priest, because I think when I was a kid, benediction was such a huge weapon for me. Like it looked cool, it felt cool, and it kind of really set the mood for me in terms of the love of the game, right? Like this is what sparked this flame in my heart where I just wanted to keep playing and wanted to keep achieving things and you know just keep going, I guess.
That's a good
So
point.
maybe maybe that's the most impactful memory, I'd say.
Funny story from my point of view is I played a little dwarf paladin in the original vanilla, and I was playing Retribution, as you do when you grow up. And I go into CG, my first raid, and this blue axe Thulian stone axe. I don't know if you know which one I mean, but it looks like someone attached a rock to a stick, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah.
But I got that axe, and I was a ret paladin, and I was the most happy kid ever running around Ironforge with that stupid axe with fire weapon on it. And that's like the main thing that got me going into, you know, looting, raiding. From raids you get all this cool stuff, and yeah, it's a stupid thing, but I get where you're coming from. But yeah, unless there's anything else you'd like to talk about or anything, I think we'd have had a good conversation. And if you know, if you wanna add anything, then go ahead. Otherwise, I think we can wrap it up.
I think there's one thing I want to say. When is Krarup gonna get a new weapon?
One day, when Mageblade drops Scribe, don't worry about it.
You're gonna drop it.
But yeah, anyway, thank you very much for talking to us. If you wanna plug anything, any shoutouts, anything at all, Exen?
I mean, shout out to my guild, Apes. And that's it. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next time.
All right, see you.
See you.
See ya.